Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today about resilient farming systems and natural resources for food and nutrition security. I will start by delving into the background of what has been happening in agriculture for the past 6 decades and how this has affected diets. Then I will talk about various nutrition smart interventions that can be taken in the agricultural sector and what are the key constraints. The fundamental cause of widespread mineral and vitamin deficiencies is that the poor cannot afford to buy sufficient vegetables, fruits, pulses, and animal products. The result is poor dietary quality. This slide shows the broad trend of what has been happening in agriculture over the past 6 decades in LMICs. Population has been growing rapidly, represented by the blue bar. Cereal production, represented by the orange bars, has more than kept pace with population growth. There was a concerted effort to raise cereal yields. This is referred to as the Green Revolution, which depended heavily on increased fertilizer use. However, the broad range of non-staple foods did not experience the same increases in productivity. This is represented by the green bars. Pulses are only one example. Over this period, cereal prices declined significantly and non-staple food prices rose sharply. For India, for example, the chart shows that cereal prices declined by 40%, then have gone back up somewhat. However, and this is the main point that I want to make about food prices, and again as shown for price data for India, non-staple food prices have doubled, nearly tripling in some cases. These tables, data for Bangladesh and the Philippines, show the resulting dietary patterns which are typical of all LMICs. Cereal consumption is high to keep from going hungry, the same level of intake across income groups. Intakes of non-staple plant foods increase somewhat with income. Animal product intakes are relatively low because they are the most expensive sources of calories, but percentage increases rise sharply with income. The foods represented by the green and red rows are the most dense in bioavailable minerals and vitamins, but intakes of minerals and vitamins are too low to meet requirements, even for the higher income groups. Simulation shows what happens to diet when all food prices rise 50% and income does not change. This beginning chart before the food price rise, using the Bangladesh data in the previous slide, shows total expenditures about equally divided between food staples, non-staple foods, and expenditure for non-food items. Typical of the poor, about 2/3 of total income is spent on food. Now you see what happens when food prices rise. The poor protect from going hungry by spending more for food staples and must lower their intakes for non-staple foods and even expenditures for non-food items. In this simulation, women's iron intakes declined by 35%. How to address the problem. The nutrition community began with programs to provide supplements and food fortification, which filled the gaps but did not directly treat the underlying problem of poor quality diets. For example, 10 billion vitamin A supplements have been given out over the past 20 years to preschool children, saving millions of lives. The cost is $1 to $2 per supplement. Countries must continue to spend year after year for supplements and food fortification. This simple stylistic diagram makes the point that it is much more cost-effective and sustainable for agriculture to supply a higher percentage of minerals and vitamins that people need at affordable prices, as represented by the green shaded portion of the rectangles, which represent total mineral and vitamin requirements. As we look to the future, we can break down the specific activities to be undertaken within agriculture into two broad groups. First, those activities which focus on food staples, which must increase the density of minerals and vitamins. Consumers already eat maximum amounts of food staples. Second, those activities which focus on non-staple foods must seek to increase the quantities eaten. Fundamentally, this second strategy is only possible if incomes can be increased and food prices can be lowered. Both broad strategies need to be pursued simultaneously. Food staples are not dense in minerals and vitamins. However, the absolute intake of minerals and vitamins from food staples is the result of multiplying quantities consumed times the density. The first term in this multiplication, quantities consumed of food staples, is a high number. Thus, as this slide shows, milled rice in the Philippines provides a very significant proportion of a wide range of minerals and vitamins in diets. In fact, no single food in the Philippines provides more nutrients than rice. The objective then, within the sub-strategy of focusing on food staples, is to increase densities. I myself have worked for more than 25 years to promote and implement a strategy of biofortification through plant breeding. This picture shows a deep orange maize developed through conventional plant breeding, which is high in vitamin A. Africans eat white maize, which has no vitamin A, but vitamin A deficiency is widespread. The orange maises are high yielding and sell for the same price as white maize. Getting Africans to substitute orange maize for white maize in their diets will go a long way toward eliminating vitamin A deficiency at no extra cost to consumers. Several types of biofortified crops are now released in 40 countries and grown by at least 10 million farm households. Some of these crops have more zinc, some have more iron, some have more vitamin A. We now are striving to make the numbers of producers and consumers of biofortified crops much higher, in the hundreds of millions. For example, 2 varieties of high zinc wheat are released in Pakistan. Data in the table at the top of the slide shows that plant breeding is a stepwise process, with zinc densities climbing over time in the breeding pipeline, rising from 36 to 38 to 40 milligrams per kilogram. Under an assumption of 20% bioavailability, zinc wheats currently provide an extra 25% or so of the estimated average requirement, and this will rise over time with continued breeding. According to a recent blog in DevX by Lynn Brown of Harvest Plus, quote, "If all wheat consumed in Pakistan's Punjab province were zinc enriched, the cost of a nutritious diet for an adolescent girl would fall by 25%. End quote. This is because of the price equality of biofortified varieties, more zinc for the same price. The previous slides refer to work using conventional plant breeding. Use of transgenic techniques, popularly referred to as GMOs, offers opportunities to multiply the benefits of biofortification. This slide shows that iron and zinc density may be greatly increased in milled rice over what is possible with conventional plant breeding. The height of the 2 leftmost yellow and blue bars in each chart show the iron and zinc densities that may be achieved using transgenics. The dashed red lines show what is possible using conventional plant breeding. The green line shows densities in current varieties of milled rice. Combine this with golden rice, and transgenic biofortified rice may contain high densities of vitamin A, iron, and zinc. Rice, of course, is the most widely eaten food staple globally. Fertilizers may also be used to increase the densities of minerals and vitamins in staple foods. There are 4 pathways through which fertilizers can contribute to higher mineral and vitamin intakes. The first pathway has already been alluded to at the beginning of my presentation. Fertilizers increase agricultural output and so keep food prices lower than they would be without use of fertilizers. This is well understood as a general concept, but the magnitude of the impact is not well quantified. The remaining 3 pathways are listed in this slide. Pathway 2, nitrogen fertilizers increase the protein and iron and zinc density of food staples. Pathway 3, adding iron and/or iodine to fertilizers and foliar sprays will increase the zinc and iodine density. Pathway 4, there are synergies combining biofortified crops with nitrogen fertilizers and adding zinc and iodine to fertilizers and foliar sprays. The evidence for these last three pathways was developed by Ismail Çakmak of Sabancı University in Turkey and his colleagues in LMICs under the Harvest Zinc program, which is a sub-program under the sponsorship of Harvest Plus. Before closing on the topic of food staples, let me make two further background points. First, it is important to note that plant breeding over the past several decades has focused on yield, which gives higher starch content without regard to nutrient content. This graph for wheat shows a historical 10 milligrams per kilogram decline in iron and zinc density. The trend is in the wrong direction. Second, it is important to note that there is a wealth of evidence now in the nutrition literature that increasing the density of vitamin A, iron, and zinc in food staples improves micronutrient status and demonstrates even that functional outcomes are improved, such as less sickness and better cognitive and work performance. The zinc content in wheat in this nutrition study undertaken in India was improved through fertilizers, that is, through the third pathway listed above. Mothers and their children who consumed the high zinc wheat had fewer episodes of illness than mothers and their children who consumed the regular non-biofortified wheat. I turn now to vegetables, fruits, pulses, animal products, those foods which are already dense in minerals and vitamins. In my opinion, the fundamental strategy should be to increase the supply of specific key foods that can contribute importantly to nutrient intakes where supply can be increased cost effectively through public policy and investments. There are two fundamental points to make. First, the primary objective is to lower the price of these specific foods. Second, these specific foods will vary greatly by country depending on dietary patterns. I find food systems to be a very broad and complex concept that can be paralyzing in terms of determining specific actionable interventions. My advice is to start with the specific foods that can make a difference and then do what is necessary within particular food systems to relieve constraints to expanding supply and lowering the price. This slide lists some possible examples, foods that are highly nutritious but whose consumption may be blocked by high price and low income. For example, milk, specific vegetables and fruits, eggs, animal livers. Gram for gram, small fish eaten whole are much more nutritious than fish fillet because bones, eyes, and other parts of the larger fish which are discarded can be very dense in minerals and vitamins. Lower the prices of any of these foods and consumers will eat larger quantities. For example, a major push by the Indian government called Operation Flood improved the efficiency of milk production. Supply went up sharply and the price went down significantly. Milk consumption increased. Lowering the price is more effective than telling the population, drink more milk. Investing in more efficient milk production was a nutrition-smart agricultural activity. What if the government had invested this policy attention and funding instead on more efficient cotton production? There are many advocates for single farm households to diversify their production and to grow nutritious foods. Does this have an effect on food and nutrient intakes independent of income? That is, are production and consumption decisions separable? Smallholder producers will sell own-produced animal and fish products, considered an unnecessary luxury if eaten at home. Home gardening involves considerable training and behavior change, taking time and resources away from other income-earning farm production possibilities. The evidence is variable and weak that these approaches are successful, that this strategy strongly improves nutrient intakes. This diagram brings together and summarizes the points that I have made on staple and non-staple food approaches to improving dietary quality, the two rows in the diagram. The columns distinguish between whether improved mineral and vitamin intakes rely on ever-present profit and price incentives, what I call indirect behavior change, the first column, or whether nutrition education is an important component of success, what I call direct behavior change, the second column. I'm a proponent of the indirect behavior change approaches. Success in the second column depends on minimizing direct behavior change. For example, Africans must change behavior in switching to orange maize in place of white maize. But for the same price, families get more vitamin A in their diets, an indirect economic incentive, more for the same price. And the taste is quite acceptable, a bit sweeter than white maize. Let me make a few final comments on the resolve or lack thereof of agricultural policymakers to work with the nutrition community on reducing malnutrition and improving health. First, let me make the quick point that focusing on staple foods offers advantages under the COVID pandemic. Dietary quality is worsening as incomes fall. There is continued high levels of consumption of food staples and a government focus on ensuring staple food supplies. Food staple approaches to increasing density offer extra minerals and vitamins in diets at no extra cost to consumers. Apart from the short-run concerns about COVID, to address malnutrition, we need a mix of all approaches. Short-run nutrition direct, such as supplementation and commercial fortification, and long-run nutrition smart interventions that treat the underlying causes. It is a matter of finding leaders and champions for each individual approach and persevering. We need to bring in more funding under the overall nutrition umbrella. Although they are cost-effective, sustainable, and resilient, a drawback to agricultural approaches are the long gestation periods. It takes many years, often decades, to have large-scale impacts globally. As parents, we invest in our children's education over 20 years. Can policymakers and donors take the same long-term perspective with agriculture? The long-term payoffs are very high. Agricultural policymakers are accustomed to focusing on increasing agricultural productivity, rural incomes, and reducing poverty. Asking them also to give priority to a nutrition lens is a relatively new idea. Some progress has been made, which might be discussed in the question and answer period. It is important to have positive examples to show, which can incentivize further momentum. On one of my many visits to FAO headquarters in Rome, 1983 was my first trip there. Relatively recently, I was waiting to meet someone in the main lobby. I noticed a small plaque on the wall and went over to read it. Here's what it said. In this building, on the 16th of October 1945, so 75 years ago this month, representatives of 44 nations met and established the Food and Agricultural Organization, first of the new United Nations agencies. Thus, for the first time, nations organized to raise levels of nutrition and to improve production and distribution of food and agricultural products. I thought, wow, 75 years ago, the policymakers mentioned nutrition first and agricultural supply second. What happened in the meantime? In closing, let me read this quote. Such intimately related subjects as agriculture, food, nutrition, and health have become split into innumerable, rigid, and self-contained little units, each in the hands of some group of specialists. The experts soon find themselves learning more and more about less and less. The remedy is to look at the whole field covered by crop production, animal husbandry, food, nutrition, and health as one related subject, and to realize that the birthright of every crop, every animal, and every human being is health. This quote sounds very contemporary, but it was actually written in 1945, 75 years ago. These ideas and concepts, broadly speaking, have been around for a long time, but it takes leadership and perseverance to put them in practice. Thank you for listening.